Welcome everybody, I'm your host Lee Adams, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today we're talking about education, something near and dear to my heart. I can't stress that enough, and we have two very special guests today. Our first guest is a native of Duquesne, Pennsylvania. He went on to Penn State University to get his bachelor's, Cal U to get his master's, and Pitt to get his doctorate. He started in Brentwood School District as a teacher, and then he came to St. Clair in 2005 as an assistant principal. He worked his way up and received numerous awards along the way, and now he finds himself the superintendent of schools of Upper St. Clair School District, Mr. John Rozzo. John, it's so great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Lee.
And next to Dr. Rozzo is a native of Fort Cherry. And she went to Edinburgh and then on to Pitt for her master's, but she got her certificate of eligibility to be a superintendent at Cal U. She started as a special ed teacher, and she was promoted to various positions and then on to assistant principal and principal at Boyce Middle School. She also has received numerous awards. Named the Deputy Superintendent of Upper St. Clair School District in 2023, Dr. Amy Pfender. Dr. Pfender, it's great to have you.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So let's start with you, John. John, when you were a kid growing up, I mean, Duquesne's different than Upper St. Clair. So when did you start to think that education, what in your background do you think brought you to a profession in education?
Well, my father was in education, so my father was a math teacher. He was also a school principal. So from early on, I watched him do it. And I went to college to major in chemistry at Penn State. And while I was there, I was actually finding myself tutoring some of my classmates. And I had a classmate of mine at one point say, "You should go into education." And so that really got me thinking about a career in education. That coupled with my upbringing and seeing my dad do it for 35 years really is what led me into education. And I've joined the profession in 1999 and have been in education since.
So your dad and a classmate were two pretty significant.
I would say, yeah, those were the two main drivers in my decision.
Interesting. Amy, how about you? Growing up in Fort Cherry, different than St. Clair. What do you think brought you to this road?
So I had a third grade teacher, Mrs. Emma Johnston, who I knew from third grade on I wanted to be a teacher. But she also, because we were a much smaller school district, had my brother, and he was in the low reading group, but she worked with him to get his reading skills up, and he went on to be valedictorian of his class. So I saw kind of what a teacher can do for a student and knew right then and there that I really wanted to be a teacher, but she was phenomenal.
You know, it's amazing. That's an amazing story. So that lends itself to reading. I mean, I think teaching reading has to be one of the most important parts of your school district. And so where are you and how do you support your reading teachers? Do you have specialists? How do you deal with kids that are really struggling in that area? I'll start with you.
Well, there's various ways, Lee. I mean, first and foremost, you have to hire great people to put in a classroom with your kids, and we're very fortunate that we have an incredibly talented staff. When you talk about teaching reading, it's really those primary grades are when the foundation's being built. And so we have a lot of supports. We have curriculum leaders. These are teachers who also serve as content experts for all curricular areas. And so at the elementary level, we have English language arts curriculum leader who leads that department, who leads all 3 elementary schools together. We have a supervisor of elementary education who also oversees programming. We have a director of curriculum who plays a part in that leadership umbrella. We have a special ed department with robust services in there to support students who maybe have a disability and need more intensive supports. So it's very layered, but there are a lot of programs, a lot of systems in place, and a lot of people that are held accountable to making sure that things are working for kids.
Interesting. So, Amy, you talk about your brother who had trouble reading, and you started into special ed. Do you think that is one of the reasons that you went in that direction, seeing your brother and what he did from going to here to the moon? Is that something that impacted you?
In terms of choosing special ed, I think he was a small piece of it, but I also just, in terms of other classes, interacted with students with special needs, and that inspired me to take the special ed route in college.
So just to add to the reading aspect, I have to think certainly, and Amy, for you, reading for special ed has to be different than the rest of the students in your district. How does that work? How is that programmed at St. Clair?
Well, it really depends on the student. I mean, as a district, we have a large population of our students that are included in the classroom with their peers, so they're receiving the same type of instruction and curriculum that is approved through our curriculum recommendation process. And then you have students who might need a more customized program, and so we have different programs depending on the student that we'll implement, but it's really student driven and data driven, so it's hard to describe until you get to know a student and see what they need when you're working with them. So we call them tiers of support. So if you have your first tier of support, you're working in the classroom, and then as you work through it, if you need additional supports and you qualify for special ed, that's a higher tier of support. But really, a lot of our students are in the classroom working with their teachers and with their peers, and maybe getting a little support outside of the classroom. And we have a small percentage of students that would leave the classroom and go into a special education classroom to receive that instruction.
Do all special ed kids have an IEP?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I know about that is we're foster parents, and we brought some kids into our home, and that's when I was introduced to the IEP. So, Dr. Rozzo, you go to Duquesne schools, on to Penn State, then you're teaching in Brentwood. So you're seeing different cultures where you're at. So now you walk into Upper St. Clair, which has to be a whole different culture. So tell me what you were thinking of when you walked into St. Clair, and what your observations were of how different the culture was in St. Clair than where you've been.
Yeah. So, while I grew up in Duquesne, I actually am a product of Catholic schools. I went to Catholic school my whole life, graduated from Sarah Catholic. And the reason I clarify that, because that's a whole other perspective. So growing up in that community, going to a Catholic school, then going to Penn State, as you mentioned, working in Brentwood, which is a great district, and then coming to Upper St. Clair, my expectations, I didn't know much about Upper St. Clair other than it was a high-performing school district. When you talked about academic success, the Upper St. Clair School District was synonymous with that. But I didn't know much other than that. And so when I came here, I think my early observations hold true to this day of seeing that it is the reality of the district, is that there's very high expectations here. Very high expectations in academics, very high expectations in athletics, in the arts, essentially very high expectations in everything. But I always tell people when we hire them that there will be very high expectations. There'll be high expectations from your supervisors, from your coworkers, from your families, from your students. But if you're doing a good job here and you're doing what's right for kids, you will have support like no other. And you'll have support from all those stakeholder groups, whether it's our families, our students. They really value and appreciate education here, and they appreciate students being placed first. And so I saw that 20 years ago when I came here. It still is the case today. I moved here many years ago, shortly after being hired, because I wanted my own children to be a product of this system and grow up here, and not only the school district, but also to reap the benefits of living in a great community. And I've said this many times in many different settings, it's one of the best decisions that I've ever made, was choosing to live here and raise my children in this community and to go through this school district.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Pfender, how about you? Fort Cherry to St. Clair, it's got to be a different world. So how was your views of the culture here and how that's progressed until today?
So it's obviously a very different experience, but I have obviously chosen to still live there and have my children go through the Fort Cherry School District. But I love this district, and it's, in terms of culture and experiences, what our students and families want, they deserve to have, and we work really hard to provide those services. It's really, I honestly, from a culture lens, it's really hard to describe, because I do think that education is valued by every single person from bottom up in this district, and we have a great staff that includes our custodians, our support staff. Everybody is in it together, and we really, and I know that sounds really cliche, but at the same time, I truly believe it.
So, I was thinking about this on the drive here, and every parent loves their kid, and they want the best for their kid. And some of those kids have special needs. And so that creates a whole different environment of learning. As a special ed teacher, describe what that's like being a special ed teacher in a district like this, Dr. Pfender.
You just work really hard, and you work really hard to have relationships, because relationships matter. And you know that the families have high expectations, but even if I was in a different district, I would want those expectations for my students, because that's how you have growth. And so you build relationships, you set a plan, you work towards it, and then sometimes you sit back one day and you think, wow, how did that happen? And you see great success with students and families and parents who are so appreciative, but yet they want then the next best thing, and they keep growing and moving. And so I started in 5th and 6th grade, and then to see students graduate and hear what they're doing today, it's so impressive, because you just see so much growth, and you see them take a path that you didn't even anticipate at one point. And so it's such a rewarding job.
That's what I was thinking, rewarding. So the Pittsburgh Business Times have ranked Upper St. Clair #1. Dr. Rozzo, talk about that, and what is the criteria for that, and how did you get there?
Well, so the Pittsburgh Business Times is an annual ranking that's published for all school districts in the region. So there's a regional ranking, and then there's a statewide ranking. And so we've been the last 2 years #1 out of 500 school districts, which we're very proud of. And that's based on performance on state assessments. So your performance on your standardized tests that are given to all public schools in Pennsylvania. And so the reason why I've never been one that likes to boast test scores or put more pressure on students for taking tests. We believe that if we have a curriculum that's designed the right way and implemented with good instructional practices, it'll yield the results that are beneficial to our kids. And so the performance on those tests they're a measure of how you're doing as a district. And we've been very fortunate in that regard that our students have performed very well. There's a lot of different metrics out there that are used. You see, in the news to rank school districts and to compare school districts. And I don't like that notion of comparing, but it's the reality of what happens. The Pittsburgh Business Times, why I think we're so proud of it, is beyond the ranking, it's also the only metric that I know of where the variable is the same for everyone. So some of the metrics out there have variables that may be things that you can't control as a school district. And so the Business Times is not that their ranking is based off of students' performance on the same assessments. In terms of how we got there, the district has had since the rankings first came out, which it's probably been, I'd have to say, 15 years, somewhere in that ballpark. The district has always performed very well with regard to that ranking. And so I think it's about having a curriculum process that's thoroughly evaluated and reviewed to make sure that you're always staying ahead and you're not being complacent. We review all curricular areas in our district twice a year. So that's elementary math, middle school math, high school math. Everything is reviewed twice a year. That's not the case in many places. We're very fortunate that we have the resources in place, the system in place, and that allows us to continue to evolve and get better. You couple that with a strong professional development program, hiring great staff, and being centered on what's best for kids. And that's how you get there. And you get there by having, we have a saying that we use, and I didn't originate it, but I use it all the time, is that great schools make great communities and great communities make great schools. And we have that ingredient here in Upper St. Clair, and it's been the case well before my time here, and I think it will be the case well after my time.
Yeah, I got to think like the people that move to St. Clair, these are generally educated professional people, and they see what education did for them, and they want the same for their kids. And so when they hand them off to you, I mean, I'm sure because you feel the same way, they have an expectation that you're just going to do the job. You're going to do the job. We came to St. Clair because of these rankings and the reputation, and they hand them over and say, okay, now it's your turn to do the job. So I'm sure that's what a lot of parents feel. So do you feel those expectations from your parents?
I think that, yes, there's no secret there's high expectations here. But those expectations, we also set them for ourselves. And so it's not just from our parents, it's really from everyone who's part of our stakeholder group here. There's high expectations. From our staff, our students have high expectations for themselves. So yes, we feel it, but along with those expectations, as I had referenced earlier, comes such tremendous support and such tremendous trust. And it kind of speaks to what you had said before about giving us their students, is they trust us. And as a school district, it takes time to build trust and relationship. And once you have it, you have to maintain it. And I always, say that it's one of the most important, if not the most important job, is educating. We're caring for other people's most important piece of their life, and that's their children.
No doubt, no doubt. Dr. Pfender, so as a teacher and then a principal, what was your experiences with parents? I have to think in St. Clair that the open houses for parents were very well attended. And I think that's common with really high achieving schools. Mm-hmm. So what did you feel from the parents as a teacher and a principal?
A lot of what Dr. Rozzo just said. You have high expectations, but we wouldn't have it any other way. Open house is standing room only, and our teachers worked really hard to prepare for those because we also want to provide a quality open house experience that comes with a lot of content, and so parents are aware of what will be happening in their child's classroom each year, and to know what the expectations are in terms of growth and the information that they will receive. By the time you get to middle school, and I was at Boyce, the kind of home to school communication starts to dwindle just a little bit as kids start to get older, but we work to kind of keep that communication line open and make sure that parents are in the know, but also start to grow your learners so that they have those self-advocacy skills that are so important as they start to get older. But the parental piece was just one that I valued so much because you would learn things about students when parents would reach out, and things that you might not know from a kid but would help you grow them as a learner. Sometimes the feedback that you receive is really good feedback because we grow as a district then from that feedback from parents. So you have to really be able to, and I think as an administrator in any public education environment, you have to be able to really think about how important the parent unit is and what you need from those parents to be able to grow your learners, grow your district, grow your staff, because every aspect of feedback is something that we value, and we make decisions based off of that information to really continue to design a great program that's in alignment with our curriculum process. In terms of parents and our curriculum process, we have a community input group that provides that insight as well too. So, and I know that's separate from the building leader question, but at the same time that just goes to show how much we value our stakeholders.
Yeah. Now you have this principal-teacher effectiveness model. Talk about that.
The teacher evaluation model?
Yes.
Yeah, that is so that is the evaluation model that is required from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. For us, it's a piece of how we evaluate our staff, but in terms of giving staff feedback and continue to grow and develop them, we do so much more through our own professional development program, through our internal mentoring, through our curriculum leader model. So it's an opportunity to evaluate, but it's also an opportunity to give feedback and to help grow our teachers. Part of that is based off of their classroom performance. Part of it is based off of certain student data points. So it's an interesting mix of it's not just a subjective rating based off of how they're performing in the classroom. There is also student data that's attached to it. And it's changed. I've seen it change, there's been several variations of it, even in my career in 24 years. And I wouldn't be surprised if it continues to evolve and change. But if you want to have meaningful impact on teachers in terms of their professional growth, you certainly can't just rely on the teacher effectiveness model that's required from the state. You have to be doing things internally in order to best meet your teachers' needs, and that ultimately impact your students.
Dr. Pfender, you've been on both sides of that coin, and both of you have, but you've been the teacher being evaluated, and you've been the principal evaluating, and now the administrator. So talk about the different sides of that and how you want to make that as the most effective that you can.
I think it's funny from a teacher's perspective, and you talk to teachers who have been observed by their building administrator for 20 years, and everybody still gets this sense of nervousness when an administrator comes in to observe them. And it's about providing feedback for teacher growth, but it's also about the opportunity to go into the classrooms and see the great things that are happening there. From an administrator lens, I will say the very first year that teacher accountability in terms of student test scores came about, I was a building principal, and that was a learning curve because testing and student achievement and growth was not a part of evaluations up until then, and it was hard for some teachers because it raised kind of the standard and stress that goes into that, and just a new learning curve for them because when I started teaching in 2001, we had the carbon papers and you tore them apart, and so here we are now using electronic systems and looking at data that the state collects and provides information to us on. So I think that from a teacher lens, you get excited, you get nervous, your end of year evaluation, you wait for that feedback, you meet with your administrator. From a principal's lens, I always looked at that as a really great time to connect one-on-one with staff and hear about their goals for the following year, things that went well, things that didn't go as well as they wished, and what can I do to continue to grow them. And I think that that's the way we look at it from a central office lens as well.
I had a chance to talk to Esther Lauderman, who is a very accomplished teacher, administrator, principal, and I was talking to her about getting ready for this interview here. And one of the things she said really struck me, that everything that she did was, there's so much to do in the schools, but the core laser focus was centered around teaching and learning, and how we can do that the most effective way. She worked in a district with much different socioeconomic than St. Clair, but that's really where the rubber hits the road, the teaching and the kids. And what you're saying, Dr. Rozzo, is you just have so much support. You have accountability for these teachers, but you also have support for these teachers. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. How stressful is it? Because you're both teachers, and now you have different, now you're overseeing the teachers and the whole school. How stressful was it for you, Dr. Rozzo, to be a teacher? What was it like when you were in the classroom?
Yeah, I never saw it as stressful. I loved being a teacher. I enjoyed every minute of it. There's times I very much miss it. I didn't see it as stress. I saw it as a great opportunity to make meaningful relationships with students and have such an impact on their life. And I don't just say that. I have students that I've remained in contact with who are now close to 40 years old. And it's not what I taught them in science, it was how I treated them as people. And that's what I always try to emphasize to our staff is 30 years from now, they might not remember what you taught them in your course very well, but they certainly will remember how you treated them and how you cared for them. And so that's really the larger mission you have in education. Certainly, we're here to educate them and make sure academically they're growing, but I didn't see it as stress. I saw it as a great opportunity and to impact children's lives. And you know, I always thought that I didn't take the job for granted, and I didn't underestimate the importance of it. And even at a young age, I saw and thought, I'm responsible for other people's children. And at the time, I didn't fully appreciate that because I was not yet a parent myself. And then, you know, after becoming a parent, you even grow a deeper appreciation for how important the job is and why it's so essential that you do it the right way. And so I think if there's any stress that would come from teaching or even administration, it's making sure that you're always doing the right thing for kids, and whether it's unintentional or not, you don't ever want any of your decisions or actions to have a negative impact on them.
Dr. Pfender, taking you back to being a teacher, how did it feel for you, and how important is it to control your classroom?
So starting as a young educator, I think it's stressful because it's new, right? And especially in the field of special education, you have a classroom of students that their needs are so very individualized. But then you work with your colleagues and learn management. But classroom management is one of the key components to making sure instruction happens. If a teacher does not have good classroom management skills and can't build that management through relationships with students, instruction is really hard to happen as well too. So you have to be able to set expectations for your students. I'm not saying that you need to come in and be a boss or rule with authority, but just have those expectations set in terms of classroom management for your students, because if you don't have expectations and you don't have organization, instruction is really hard to implement. And that's sometimes challenging, especially for the middle school level, and that's where I started with 7th and 8th grade. And so you have to work really hard to set those boundaries, set those expectations, and be able to provide the instruction. And then the stress isn't even really there. I remember when I first started, somebody told me it'll take you 3 years to feel like you've got it under your belt. And it was a true statement. After my 3rd year, I wasn't moving my classroom around as much. I would stay many Friday nights saying, oh, this week just didn't go the way I wanted it to. And so I'd rearrange and we'd try again. And that's all part of the learning curve and experience. And I think just as you grow as an individual, things that bothered you 20 years ago, they don't bother you now because you live, you learn, you grow. And that's really the way education is as well too. And education has changed a lot since we first started. And it'll continue to grow, and we need to be ready to respond. And that's what we do as a district.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Rozzo, what programs distinguish Upper St. Clair School District?
Well, there's so many. First of all, I think just our core curriculum and what we offer there distinguishes. If you look at our program of study and the range of courses that we offer at our high school, from AP, Advanced Placement, IB, to elective courses where they're taking engineering courses, architectural courses. We're proud of all of them. And so, we have a STEAM, fully developed STEAM program, robotics courses. I can't say that we're proud of any one program more than the other. It's all about creating an experience where you give students choice. There's programs we're proud of our performing arts, and when you look under that umbrella, you have orchestra, you have band, you have choir, you have musicals at all levels, you have plays, sports. We have 21 sports that we offer at our high school alone. Then we have a robust middle school sports program on top of an intramural program. So there's so much here. But it's all of those things. And what I appreciate about Upper St. Clair is when you talk about expectations, the expectation here is how do we continue to evolve and add more and to grow more based off of our students' needs. And so it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge.
Yeah. Dr. Pfender, what do you think attributes to the success of the Upper St. Clair School District?
The people.
It really just boils down to the people.
I mean, all you have to do is stand outside each of our schools on the very first day of school and watch the kids come in off the bus, watch the staff greet the students, drive around the community and see parents sending their students off, or come to one of our events and see the participation and the attendance. And so it's really, the success is based on our people.
You know, I think it's so great that both of you started in the classroom, because I think, you know, not all people at the highest levels of the school districts had done that, but you both did that. So you have really experienced schools from the classroom all the way up. Do you think that that helps you do a good job where you are right now, Dr. Rozzo?
I think it has helped provide a perspective that is essential to do this job. And so, you know, the largest employee group we have in our district are our teachers, and it's our primary business. And so being able to have walked in their shoes, and while times have changed, you have to have an understanding and have experiences that you can actually relate to and have a sense of what is an expectation of being a teacher. And it's the same with being, you know, a building level administrator, a district level administrator to the superintendent. Having that perspective, I feel very fortunate to have had all those experiences, and I feel fortunate to have had the large majority of those experiences in this district, because having spent almost 2 decades and the majority of my career in this district, there is such value I place on having that historical knowledge of people, of systems, of community, of family, and it served me well, and it's invaluable to the work that I feel I do on a daily basis.
How do you feel that helps you, Dr. Pfender, as far as you started in the classroom, and that's really what it's all about here? How do you feel that helps you in what you do today?
I think it gives you the perspective and the ability to be able to sit down and have conversations with people, right? You can sit and talk about your own experiences, and even though education has evolved and changed since I was last in the classroom, it gives you kind of that validity to sit and have conversations with staff and with families. So to be able to sit and have a conversation and put an initiative in place and or talk about what a student needs but not have that background or experience doesn't give you really the validity to sit down and have people take what you're saying seriously. And so I think that there's the accountability piece. To be an administrator, you have to have done the work to get there and be able to have those conversations with people based off of your experiences. Because if you make a recommendation and you haven't really lived at least a portion of it, I think that's a really hard message to receive.
Yeah, and so when you as you've moved up, you've had different bosses, both of you. Both of you have had bosses as you've moved up the ladder. We'll start with Dr. Pfender. Have any of the people that you work for influenced the type of administrator you are today?
That's an interesting question. So I never thought I was going to be an administrator. When I went to Pitt, I was like, I'll get my principal's papers. But Dr. Sharon Staritsky, sitting beside me at a training one day, said, "You have your principal's papers, right?" And I thought, oh, where is this headed? And lo and behold, I started to kind of take on some leadership responsibilities in the district. So she was really instrumental in my growth, and not just because he's sitting here, but Dr. Rozzo has been a great mentor and support to me as well as I've worked through the district. We've worked in a variety of different roles together for a really long time.
So what's his management style from your
Is
perspective?
that a trick question?
We have to throw some good ones in there.
He trusts. We work very well collaboratively, but I think the fact that he trusts me and lets me lead in the way that I lead, I value. And so I think the trust that he has, just not in me, but our other leaders, really allows us to do great things in the district. But I also know there's expectations, and when I need to share something, I share it and we talk through it. So I think it's hard to describe just because of the level that we're at. We know what we need to do, and we come in each day and we do it.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Rozzo, I've been in many leadership positions in my life, and I was fortunate to have some people to look up to help me feel that it's almost natural from my perspective. How about you? How have you evolved into this position? Because you're in a big job, overseeing a very outstanding school districts with great parents, successful parents, and great kids, and big expectations. So how have you evolved into who you are today, and how you handle the people that work for you?
I think, Lee, it's all about people that are in your life and experiences that you have, and I feel very fortunate from the outset of my career. I've been around really good people. From my first principal that hired me as a teacher, played a significant role in not only my development as a teacher, but encouraging me to go back to become an administrator, or to get my principal certification to become an administrator, and helped me along that pathway and taught me a lot about leadership. I came to Upper St. Clair, and entirely too many people to mention, but I've been surrounded by really good mentors and some people who are the best in this profession. And you try to take pieces of each of them, and obviously you have to be your own leader and you have to be who you are, but having that access to all of those people and experiences along the way, you take bits and pieces of that, and that helps shape who you are. And I think you have to have a mindset that you're never done growing. And I always say that the minute, I don't care how successful you are as a coach, as a professional, as whatever it may be, the minute you think that you've arrived and you're done growing, it's the minute you're done. And so for us, I feel like, while I've had all these people in my life who've helped, I also have people around me now that I look at and think it's not even necessarily people who are your supervisors, it's people that you work with, and people like Dr. Pfender and many other administrators. You get better by working with people like them, people that you can learn from. And I'm a firm believer you can always learn things, and there's always going to be somebody that knows more and somebody who can help you. And I think that is really one of the keys in this job is you can't do it all. As you had mentioned, it is a massive job, and there's incredible responsibility with that, and I certainly understand and appreciate that. But what you have to do is you have to recognize, where am I strongest? Where should I focus the majority of my energy, and how do I maximize my team, and what skills and strengths do they have, so that we can ultimately create the best experience possible in the district, and that's really what our aim is.
Dr. Pfender, so you moved up the ranks, like both of you. You've moved up the ranks, and you interviewed for the position of Deputy Superintendent at Upper St. Clair School District. So when you got that offer, what was going through your mind, thinking, this is a big position here, this is a big responsibility here? What was going through your mind personally as you were making a decision with your family, because it impacts your family? So what was your personal thoughts as you were contemplating this opportunity?
So it's a little surreal growing up in a small district, and then to have this great opportunity to be a leader as the deputy superintendent in the Upper St. Clair School District. And even today, it's surreal at times to know that this is where I've grown as a professional. Personally, I have a great family. They kind of just learned early on as I stepped into administration that, and unfortunately, it's the sacrifices we make as leaders. Sometimes family isn't first, and it's tough, and you find balance in that. But my family has been extremely supportive, and I'm extremely grateful for that, because I attribute where I'm at a lot to my family today, for giving me the room to grow professionally, go back to school, continue to keep crazy hours while I'm doing classes. And so, it's really an honor to be where I'm at in this district, but I also know that I've worked really hard to get here, and I recognize that. but it's once again hard to really describe because it's a surreal experience sometimes when you're driving to work and you're coming up Truxton and you turn to the right and there's the football field and you think, wow, this is what I do.
This is what I do. Dr. Rozzo, same thing. You're moving up the ladder and you get the job offer to be the superintendent of Upper St. Clair School, the top chief of the school. Huge responsibility, huge honor to get that offer. What's going through your head?
A lot. Yeah.
I'll bet.
Yes. As Amy had said, and you just mentioned, it was an incredible honor. And I recognize as somebody who, again, had been in our school district for a long time, the importance, the prestige of the job, the history, the responsibility that's attached to it. So I certainly was honored. It's one of those things, though, it's one of those life experiences, you don't know what you don't know. And so I served as the assistant superintendent for 5 years before being superintendent, and you work very close to that position, so you think that you have a really good understanding of the job. And I did, but there was obviously a lot that I didn't know. And so it was eye-opening at times, and then we've in the last 5 years probably have had more change and just more unprecedented events happening in our world than ever before. So that's also was a piece of it. But to go back to your question, it was a mixture of emotions for sure. Pride, I live here, very proud of our community, excited, eager to continue to move things forward. But also initially, I'd be lying if I didn't say there was an element of being nervous because it's such an important job, and you see the history here and how great it's been, and you know that there's not much room for error, and to stay at that level, it takes a lot of intentionality, and so I recognize that, and but it definitely didn't come without some initial thoughts of, wow, this is real and this is going to be different.
Yeah. So another area that I think is so important to talk to you both about is our world was faced with a global pandemic. Over 1.1 million Americans died from the pandemic, more than all the wars combined. And every single household was affected. Yours, mine, and anyone watching this show and everybody in your classrooms. It was a bomb that was dropped onto our society. So you, being the backbone of Upper St. Clair, people are looking at you. And your school doesn't stop. And so talk about how you dealt with that and how much of a challenge it was for you, Dr. Rozzo.
Well, it was an enormous challenge, obviously. Everything we were dealing with was unprecedented. And so from the initial closure that came in March of 2020, at that point in time, schools were closed. There wasn't great guidance and direction. And it's not a criticism, it's just a reality because people really didn't know what are we getting into. And that when we first closed, we thought it was going to be a 2-week closure, ended up being a closure where the state ultimately closed schools for the remainder of the school year. And so as you're navigating that, you're trying to essentially completely repurpose, redesign your delivery model. And so we had to, on the fly, figure out how can we deliver meaningful instruction in a remote environment because we can't physically have kids here, and we don't know what that's going to even look like as we move into the subsequent school year. And so it was incredibly challenging, from changing our delivery model completely, making sure that all the resources existed. Now we had 4,000 classrooms because every student was in a different classroom. They were either in their room, their house, and in the living room. Every environment was different. You have teachers teaching remotely from their homes, and so you can imagine it was quite a challenge for everyone involved, for parents, for students, for district staff, and as the pandemic went on, each year brought new challenges. We came into year 2, we were, because of requirements, because of spacing requirements that were in place, we couldn't fit and couldn't have every student in school at first full time. And so we went to a part-time model, and we would have half students learning online, then the next day they could come in person, but then we also had a full virtual option available for students. So we completely had to recreate education as we know it. And you had to do it on the fly with really the only resources that you had essentially were the resources that were specific to your district. And so what I mean by that is I recognized early on that we're going to have to build whatever we need here in Upper St. Clair. And so one of the things we did at the outset of the pandemic is I had created 3 pandemic leadership teams. We had one that focused strictly on instruction and delivery of instruction. And so you have educators in there, our technology people in there, administrators. We had the composition of all the curriculum leaders, all the people that were essential to that team. Then we had a health and safety team. So that was, relying a lot on our school nurses, our school physician, healthcare agencies that we needed to consult with. And they were responsible for the health and safety and really managing the guidance and the requirements around that, and advising me and the school board ultimately on what we needed to do and how we needed to do it. And then the third team was facilities and operations, because as you can imagine, particularly as we transitioned back to in-person learning, schools look very different. If you walked into schools, you not only had students all wearing face coverings, but you now had classrooms that looked much different, spaced out. You had borders on desks for kids. You had lunchrooms that did not look like lunchrooms anymore. And so you had cleaning requirements that really changed even how your custodial staff worked. So it was a complete change in just about everything you do. And while you're doing that, you're serving 4,000 students from approximately 2,500 families, and everyone's affected differently by it, personally, professionally, and you're trying to do what's best for kids, recognizing that everyone is having such unique challenges. It was very difficult. I hope we never have to go through something like that again. The only positive I will say is there were some good things that came out of it. There were some efficiencies that we gained. We kind of joke, but not joke now, that there's no problem we can't solve. And that's our mindset, because we had to solve and figure things out that we would have never even fathomed were a possibility. And so I think it's shifted our perspective and our mindset when it comes to that. We've become much stronger with how we use technology in schools for the better. And then it also even how we create efficiencies. Before the pandemic, the idea of a virtual meeting was pretty uncommon. You didn't see that much. And so even now, if we need to have a meeting with our school principals, and it's a 30-minute meeting where Dr. Pfender and I need to meet with them about something, we don't need to bring them to the district office. We said, okay, we're going to go into a Google Meet. We're going to take care of our business. We're going to be efficient with everyone's time. We're not going to pull you out of the schools. So there are a lot of efficiencies that we gained from it too, but certainly would not want to do it again.
It's just massive what you just said. But how about from a personal standpoint? You're sitting in the superintendent's chair of one of the best school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. And we are throwing a global pandemic where people are dying just from breathing the same air of somebody else inside. And so from a personal perspective, when you are faced with this, and you have kids yourself, who did you lean on? Where did your mind say, I need to lean on some people to help me lead this?
I leaned on my team at work. people like Dr. Pfender and many others. I'm very fortunate. We have a really talented and committed group of administrators in our district, from building level principals to district level administrators. Excuse me. That was the main group I leaned on professionally. Obviously, my family was very supportive. Outside of work, although during those times, even though we were virtual, particularly the first couple months, we were working around the clock, because we were building the plane as we were flying it, so to speak. And so you have to. I'm very fortunate. I had a very good school board that was also very supportive, leaning on them at times too. It was a collective effort. Certainly I had my job in being the lead in the district, but I could not have done it without having such a strong, supportive, talented staff, and relying on their expertise. And we really, I will say, as a district, from teachers to curriculum leaders to administrators, school board, I have never seen the level of collaboration like I did during those times, and it was really impressive and inspiring. And at the time you don't fully appreciate it because you're in the middle of a complete crisis that seemed like it was never ending. But that network of quality people helped
get you through it.
Helped get me through it, for sure.
Dr. Pfender, where were you when this pandemic started? Where were you, and what has been your role through all of this?
So at that point in time, I was the assistant to the superintendent. I was completing my letter of eligibility. And at that point, I was primarily responsible for grades 9 through 12. So I worked very closely with high school administration through the closure. But when you're talking about this, I'm sitting here thinking about, like, where were we? I remember specifically where we were on Friday, March 13th of 2020 in our boardroom when they announced schools were closed. And then I remember where I was sitting in April when the governor announced schools would remain closed. And I was sitting on my couch at home, and we really thought we were coming back. And when you go into education to be with people, to know that you're not going to be with people for a period of time, face to face, it was a lot. And I think we did work around the clock. I don't know if there is an individual in our district from the time the closure happened until we were up and running in September of 2020 that we knew how to stop, because it was ongoing. And we wanted to continue to provide the best education that we could given the circumstances. Personally, I had 2 small ones at home, and well, not small ones, but still they needed help. And that was the same struggle that a lot of families were experiencing. You're working remotely, you're trying to support your own kids at home. I had sticky notes all around me between what I needed to do for work, questions that they had from school, work that they were doing. But in terms of the district itself, like the reopening team work that we did in that fall, and schools were never really truly closed, but we worked really hard to provide in-person instruction to our students because that's what we knew they needed and that's what we knew they deserved. And so we made sure it happened. And I think that that's why we see Upper St. Clair experiencing so much success currently as well, because we provided as much in-person instruction as we possibly could. And teachers and leaders, you had to have courage because it was challenging. You didn't know what was happening, and you just kept going with the fact that you needed to do what kids needed to have you do.
Yeah. Dr. Rozzo, so many studies nationwide talk about the slippage in educational growth during that time. What you did by really turning the Titanic midstream during a global pandemic was a gargantuan task. But when you did your assessments after that time, how did St. Clair fare with the massive challenge that was thrown at you academically? I mean, so how did you find where your kids were academically going through that?
Well, Lee, I think we were very fortunate that we fared well, and I think there's several reasons for that. One is we have great staff, and I keep saying that, but I can't say it enough. We have great teaching staff who created a really good remote environment for students. It's not the same as being in person, for sure. In-person learning cannot be replaced. For some students, obviously virtual learning might better meet their needs, but generally speaking, in-person learning is far superior. And particularly then you look at age level appropriateness too. You know, a high school student learning in a virtual environment versus a first grader who's learning how to read are two very different dynamics. So I think our staff and our administration and how we were committed to building that virtual delivery model was very helpful. The other piece of it we've kind of spoken to earlier about part of the recipe to success here is we have parents who are very involved with their children's education, and that benefited us too. I mean, our parents were like another set of teachers in homes, where they were working side by side with their kids, and whether it's while they're on camera or they're not on camera, that was pivotal and that was invaluable to us. We were fortunate that we had technology for all of our students here in the district, so all district students have district provided technology. We have a learning management system, it's called Canvas. These things were already in place prior to the pandemic, with the exception of our primary grades at our elementary school. That took some quick decision making and getting resources in place. But obviously those decisions weren't made because we were anticipating a global pandemic. It was part of our commitment to continue to grow and evolve as a district. So we had the technology resources. We had the learning management system, and those became vital to our work during the pandemic. You know, obviously, as I mentioned, the parent involvement was significant. And when we built our virtual delivery model, keep in mind that there was no standard platform for how to do it, meaning it wasn't a one-size-fits-all, because 500 districts have different resources, have different needs, have different capabilities. We were doing it live too. So we were delivering synchronous instruction with some asynchronous instruction, which is not live instruction, where we know, unfortunately, that there were a lot of districts that maybe weren't as fortunate and didn't have the ability to deliver any live instruction to students for periods of time. And then some districts also did not go back in the fall of 2020, and some were out that entire year. So I think also that commitment to getting students back to school in a responsible way was a lot of effort and a lot of intentionality was made to that. And I think because of all those reasons, we did fare well. And again, though, everyone was impacted differently. It's not just about academics. There were families, there were kids that certainly experienced some real challenges, and probably to this day are affected by it. And some people will be affected by it forever, regardless of what community you live in and how great the school district is. To your point, it rocked everyone. And so I feel very fortunate that we, I think, withstood all that and handled it very well. But it's not something I want to do again.
No, not at all. Another big change that you guys have made recently is the start time.
Yes.
So I'd like to talk about that.
Sure.
Talk about how that even started to become under consideration, and how did you take it through to the end? So
the start time conversation has been talked about for decades, not just here, but throughout the nation. But in Upper St. Clair, it was talked about 30 years ago. So before we were even in the district, people started talking about it, and then it would garner some traction, and then it would stop, and then people would start talking about it again. And so as we concluded the pandemic and we have our annual strategic initiatives that are essentially our broad district goals for the year, and some of them extend over multiple years, one of the ones that we believed was important was our start time and our students' health. We've been talking about this for many decades. There is a great deal of research, medical research, that supports these start times for our students. And the reality is the reason why most districts don't make the change is because it's not easy. And it requires a lot of logistical challenges and a lot of logistical things that you need to think through. And so the way we approached it was, our high school started at 7:30. Most of our high school students that were taking buses, we had buses picking up kids before 7 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark out in many cases. So there's whole other safety concerns attached with that beyond the sleep patterns and what the research tells us. And so what we did is we had that was our strategic initiative. We had a committee of people in our strategic initiative. We have committee members, team leads, and they are tasked with leading the essential work that needs to be done and completed to determine whether or not we can make this happen. And so for us, what we were able to do is we wanted to do this without adding transportation, without adding costs, and we were able to do that. And we were able to do that, bump the high school back to an 8 o'clock start time. It obviously had an impact in the other levels, elementary and middle school starting later, but it ultimately is what's best for everyone. And so we're still early in that. This past August was, obviously our first time with the 8 o'clock start, but our students are responding very well, are very happy about it. And it garnered a lot of attention locally, and national news reached out to us. Start time is not just, unique to Upper St. Clair, but I think regionally, there's a reason why it's, more people aren't doing it. And it's because challenges are different everywhere. There was a state legislator that reached out to me a few months ago about a bill that she was sponsoring that would change start time for every school district and bump it back. And I just cautioned her and said that the only challenge is, while I'm an advocate for it, is you have to recognize no two districts are the same. And so for us, we were able to do it without adding transportation and cost. That might not be everyone's reality. And so unless it's something that would be funded appropriately, it could really be detrimental to school districts too if their needs are such. And so, it was not a new idea. It was 30 years in the making, and we finally, and the last thing I'll say about it is when we talk about pandemic and some of the good things that came out of it, that was one of the discussion points we had is we could figure out how to completely redesign our instructional model, navigate all these challenges of the pandemic, but we can't figure out how to bump school start time back 30 minutes. And so that was kind of really the wake-up call for people is let's get this done. It's perspective, right? Yes.
You already moved that Titanic during the pandemic,
right,
so you could do this, and you
yes,
did it. And Dr. Pfender, how has it been received from what you hear?
Very positively. I mean, any change comes with adjustments, but I think people grew into that change very quickly. Being a person who was usually coming up the hill as kids were walking to the high school in the dark, and to see them now walking there and the sunlight's coming up. I don't think any high schoolers complaining that they get to sleep a half hour longer. So in terms of staff, I think we're seeing they've adjusted, and it didn't change what we were doing instructionally, but our hope was to also increase student engagement and have them just be a little bit more alert when they're coming in the mornings. So from my perspective, everything has gone very smoothly in terms of this change, but it's because of the intentionality that was built into the process.
So I want to preface this next question based on a personal experience. So I come from a family of 4. I'm the oldest. My father is a Pittsburgh policeman working the Martin Luther King riots in 1968. The stress of that job was so incredible that 2 years after those riots, he died of a sudden heart attack at the age of 42. So it was just like we were talking about, the pandemic was like a bomb dropped on St. Clair and Mount Lebanon and Peters and everywhere else. Well, there was a bomb dropped on my family because he was the leader of our family, and all of a sudden he's gone. Now, I was in school. I was in 8th grade. And we have 4 kids, and this is back at a time where counseling was not as readily available. So the 4 of us kids had to deal with that on our own, because my mother was just treading water just to try to keep a roof over our head and food in our bellies. But I look back and I say to myself, I really needed some help. my brothers and sisters really needed some help. And I bring this to you because this happens in Upper St. Clair. This happens everywhere. Like, things happen in families, divorces, deaths, tragedies, but school doesn't stop. They go back to school. So I remember going into the guidance office, and my guidance counselor was a teacher and my basketball coach, and he's like, "How are you doing?" And I thought, I don't even know how to answer that question. And so that was the extent of what anybody ever asked me as a kid. So I bring this because all of us have challenges. All of us have gifts. Life hits some people hard at different times. Now, you're sitting here as the constant in Upper St. Clair. You're the school. You got teachers, you got counselors, you got nurses, you got administrators, and you got a kid walking into school where their parent just passed away. And so I want to talk about the support services of Upper St. Clair and how you oversee that, and what kind of services do they give your kids when they need it?
Well, it's very robust, for sure. We have a student support services department in our district. We have a director of student support services that oversees various areas that are really attentive to student needs, particularly counseling. So we have full-time counselors in all of our school, which is not a requirement. A lot of people think that. But we have a counselor at each of our 3 elementary schools. We have 2 counselors at each of our middle schools. We have 6 counselors at our high school. We have a team of school psychologists that we have in the district. Beyond that, we have various models in place that help make sure that our people really know kids. So for example, in our elementary, middle schools, even our high school, we have professional learning communities, which what we're doing each week is you have groups of teachers who are meeting and talking about students' needs and talking about kids, not just academically. You have a students assistant program we have in each of our buildings, and there's a students assistant program team that involves teachers, administrators, experts in the area of student support who are also part of that team. They're talking about kids regularly, so you're trying to be more proactive than reactive. Obviously, there are going to be things that happen that aren't on your radar, but having the right people and programming and systems in place is an essential part of what you do, because if a kid is not healthy and is not well, academics are not going to. That's secondary to their well-being, and it goes back to keep saying hiring good people who really care about getting to know their kids. And that's not just teachers, that's also your principals too. I mean, we have a school police in every building in our district to build meaningful relationships with kids. And what you have to do as a school is you don't know who's going to connect with a kid. Maybe it's their classroom teacher, maybe it's a school police officer, maybe it's a coach. That network, though, is so important that you make sure that you surround the kids with enough good people and enough opportunities to make connections so that nothing slips through the crack. Because you can have all the formalized programming and system in place, and things still can slip through the crack and will slip through the crack. But building those relationships and having the good people, the more good people you have around kids, the better it is for kids. It's just really that simple. And Dr. Pfender, has overseen the student support services, and so obviously she has been very much involved too with making sure that we're always trying to think ahead in our programming and what we're offering and what we're doing for kids, because the challenges are always going to be there, as you said, and they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
But I think it's so interesting what you said about you just don't know who's going to connect with that kid. So Dr. Pfender, I want you to speak to that, because this is your wheelhouse, and kids, they don't always need support, but sometimes they need a lot of support. And I certainly did. I didn't get any, but where I got support was from coaches. Mm-hmm. And just like you say, you never know. Well, sports was important to me. And so these coaches were telling me, if you don't do well in school, you can't play on this team. And I really wanted to play on that team, so it impacted me beyond what I could have even imagined. And it helped me go to college, be the first person in my family to go to college. So you don't know. So Dr. Pfender, talk about your support services and how important that is at Upper St. Clair.
So one other aspect that I'd like to add on just in terms of our staffing is we have a school nurse in each building as well too. So you can never underestimate how a student can connect with a school nurse and what a school nurse is observing as well too. That's where we get lots of insider information in terms of a student who might be coming there often and not want to be in a classroom and or is not going to lunch, and using all of that information to make informed decisions. So really when we think about our programming and our support in the district, we obviously start with our students and what are our students, how are they performing, what do they need, what are our teachers then telling us. But we also, from a student support services lens within the district, there's 2 programs that I really wanted to highlight. And one is a mental health referral service because it's called Care Solace. And it is a program that, because not only is it about connections with students, it's about connections with families. And currently, one of the things that you hear in the national news is the lack of resources available to families to support kids. And so Care Solace, we utilize and provide families with the information to be able to connect and provide support outside of the school. But inside of the school, we also work closely with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and have contracts for a social emotional consultant. And in terms of our student support assistance teams, we have somebody from UPMC that sits on that team to provide us with that expert information that Dr. Rozzo referred to when we're thinking about students. In terms of connections, I think one of the things that, you go through elementary school, you have a homeroom teacher, but just thinking about the initial introduction with a bus driver. Every year we hear about how great our bus drivers are and the initial hello and the final goodbye of the day and how important that connection is for students. So connections start from the moment they walk out of the door and they get on that school bus and they come to school. In elementary, they have their homeroom teachers, but one of the foundations of our middle school is the teaming aspect. And so we have 3 or 4 homerooms of kids that teachers get to know kids really, really well, in addition to those professional learning communities. So you have the student support services realm, which kind of surrounds all of our students, but then you have all of the things that are happening within the school day to help build those connections for kids. We have custodians who are walking around the lunchrooms and they're noticing kids who might not be eating or might be eating by themselves and making recommendations. So we can never underestimate, and as you said, your connection was with coaches. Sometimes we have kids that connect with the person that you would least expect, but then we build that relationship. The kid says, what would be really cool is if I could hang out with so-and-so. All right, how do we make that happen? And I think that's one of the things that makes us really unique as a district as well too, is we foster those connections, we listen to our kids, but then we also really want to work with our families because the support doesn't end and shouldn't end during the school day.
It's really terrific. So I'm just feeling that what happened to me, if that happened to me in Upper St. Clair today, I'm hearing that it would be a whole different experience of me walking into that school because you guys would be notified. And what would you do? What would you do if you just heard that this kid just lost his father? Like that, which was shocking. And how would Upper St. Clair react to that?
So that's a really individualized question because each family, I think, handles a trauma situation very differently. So we try to obviously start with a home to school connection and work with permissions from families. So if we have specific permission from a family, we would go into a homeroom, developmentally appropriate manner, talk to the students about the tragedy that a family member or a student has experienced. But the counselors are right there. Our school counselors are top notch. We don't joke around when we hire anybody, but our counselors are amazing. And they're there to greet that student off the bus. Our building administrators are working with the teachers to kind of share any information they've had. We, as a district, also express our sympathies in different ways, but we've sent support to the funeral homes if there is a viewing. We really think through each layer in terms of starting with the communication, thinking about what can we do during the school day to make a child feel comfortable, teach kids what to say or not to say or ask when a student returns. and kind of follow the wishes of the family, because some students don't want to talk about anything when they first return. But all of our staff is also trained in trauma-informed care practices, and so we really do a lot when we think about the different situations that happen and signs to look for a student, because it might be months before a student really feels the impact of this tragedy, and what do we need to do. So I think it's a tough question to answer, because it is so individualized based off of the wishes of the family and the situation in which a tragedy has occurred. But we really start student, staff, home, and we keep that circle going. And if a student is appearing to need more, then we implement our student assistance program. And we're also working with our experts from UPMC to help us if we need any additional supports.
It just sounds wonderful. And I'll just add this one last thing. When I took a week off after the funeral. The day I'm walking to the bus, I had this overwhelming feeling that something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me. Because all of the other people, my friends, have 2 parents. I have 1 parent. So something's wrong with me. So obviously, I needed some help. And back then, mental health and those kind of things, they were looked at differently. Mm-hmm. It really was. And now I think mental health has become more accepted and not swept under the rug. I had a chance to talk to the Penn State University main campus director of counseling services. I had a chance to talk to him one day. And I asked him, I said, what do you see the most here? And this is your alma mater. What do you see the most? 40,000 plus kids at State College. What do you see the most? He says, it's 2 things, depression and anxiety. He goes, sometimes depression leads and sometimes anxiety leads. We see everything, but these are the top 2. And this is what we do. And I asked him what he did with it. So do your counselors get into that, or do they refer that out when they see that kind of thing?
So our counselors will be directly involved in terms of coaching students. We talk about building a toolkit. So if students have a diagnosis that is impacting them during the school day, we work through different plans and our student assistance process, a program process to support students. So though they may not be providing direct counseling services, we work to provide students with strategies on how to manage depression and anxiety throughout their school day. And if we're not seeing improvements, we have processes built into the district that are also guided by federal and state law in terms of providing services to students. And if it is felt that a student might need more beyond the school day, that's when they work with families to start talking about what a student might need beyond the school day. And sometimes families are coming to us saying, my child has been diagnosed with depression. This is what we're seeing at home. Are you seeing it here during the school day? Because there's also times that we don't have firsthand knowledge, because kids are holding it together during the school day. They're getting home in the evenings and they're kind of falling apart, and then that's when parents are starting to reach out to us. So I think it can go either direction in terms of the role of a counselor in focusing on, specifically to your point, anxiety and depression.
Yeah, that's terrific. So there are so many great things that I'm hearing today about Upper St. Clair. And it just sounds like a wonderful place for a parent to send their kid. But every district has challenges, everywhere. And you guys have challenges. So let's talk about that. What are some of the bigger challenges that you think your district faces, Dr. Rozzo?
Well, I think one of our challenges is we've been fortunate to have so much success academically, athletically, in the arts. A real challenge for us is, how do you continue to move forward? How do you continue to maintain that level, if not go beyond it? It's very challenging at times, and it's easy to think you can rest on your laurels, but you can't do that here. So that's a real challenge for us in every aspect of what we do here. The other challenge I think we have is we live in a time where what happens in society comes into our schools more so than ever before, and we have no control over that. And so, managing that and really the ever-changing dynamic that exists in our society too, and it changes at such a rapid pace. What impact will that have on our kids, our families, and what does that mean for us? And some of that is really unknown, for sure. Our kids live in times where they have access to everything. So, whether it's phones, being on, other technology devices, our kids have the whole world in their hands. And, when you look at social media, there's so much access that they have to such a wide variety of content, to a lot of inaccurate information, a lot of divisive information. It's a lot for adults to handle, let alone young children. And so that affects everyone differently, and some students, I think, depending on their circumstances outside school, have greater access maybe than others. But regardless of that, that's a real challenge for any school. Is what's happening in the world is going to come and impact your schools, and it might look differently in each district, but it will affect you. But I think our one of our greatest challenges is just the access that our kids now have to the world. There's a lot of benefit from it too, and we certainly maximize technology, and we use that to improve teaching and learning. But there's also a lot of risk with that too, and that's a big piece of what we deal with and will continue to deal with, because I certainly don't see that changing or lessening as we move into the future, for sure.
Dr. Pfender, you have done a lot of work, at Boyce Middle School. And middle schools, from my understanding of education, is one of the most challenging places to teach, because they're not little kids anymore, and they're not adults or have mature. There's massive changes going on with that middle school kid. I run a youth basketball association in the South Hills, and I have been lately faced with more challenges from a social media standpoint with middle school kids, that parents are calling me saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, because they're going to get shunned in school. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? Middle school is challenging to begin with. Now you drop social media into it, and that cannot help things. So how difficult has that been? And Dr. Rozzo talked about it. How have you seen that play out in the schools?
So I think when you think about middle school specifically, you asked me a question earlier about classroom management and strategies. It's no secret most of our kids 5 through 8 have personal technology devices, but they're really not out during the school day. So from a social media lens during the school day, I think we've done a really great job in terms of having our own policies and management strategies to address that. Once they get on the school bus, the rules are supposed to still apply. Sometimes, a student might decide to create a video on the school bus, and you just kind of work through that process with parents and relationships and district policies. Outside of the school day, I think it's that access piece, it's the acceptance. I think one of the things when you talk about anxiety, from a social media lens, you put something out there, how many likes am I going to get? How much feedback will I get? Oh my goodness, it's been 5 minutes and I only have 2 likes. And so it's this instant gratification, and I think that is also just driven how we design instructional lessons at this point, is that students also aren't wired to sit and learn and have a lecture for 30 minutes anymore, because the way that they are performing outside of the school day, they need it in smaller chunks, and we have to be ready to respond to that. So I think it's a bigger picture about individual technology and access than it is just the social media, but the social media plays more of that social emotional learning role beyond the school day. And then sometimes it unfortunately does feed into the school environment, but we're equipped to work through it. And we also work with our families to provide presentations specifically at the middle school level, so that families are informed, because if this is your first middle school student, you don't know sometimes what's out there from a social media lens. And though you hear about the dangers of social media and some of the different apps that are out there until you've experienced something with it or until you learn from an expert. We work really hard to keep that homeschool connection going there as well too.
Interesting, yeah. That has to be a big, big challenge. Safety. You know, another national concern of keeping kids safe in your school. You know, we see the horror stories on television across the country with certain things going on. And so Upper St. Clair is not immune to this. So how do you keep your kids safe?
Well, it requires the efforts of everyone working in your school district. And there's a lot of pieces to it. And so, first of all, we have great partnership with our township officials, our township police. That has served as a tremendous, has added great value in terms of information, and a lot of times having that intelligence is what's so beneficial in troubleshooting or being proactive. Beyond that, we have committed, our school district, particularly in the last 5 years, have committed very strongly in terms of physical and human resources in the area of safety. And so we have, cameras, over 300 cameras in the district. We have active surveillance on those cameras. We have those cameras tied directly to the township. Police officers can access that real time. We have armed school police officers in each of our buildings, and at the high school we have 2 in the high school. We have locked entries. We've just this past summer invested in complete new camera systems and entries at each of our school buildings, and how to have captured entries in all of those buildings. We've done other things that we often say, Lee, that we don't talk about in public, because any good safety plan, you don't put it all out there. Sure. But there has been a very intentional commitment to human and physical resources. It's a top priority of our district. I can assure you that it's our top priority, because if kids aren't safe and secure, nothing else matters. And so there's no foolproof plan. I think having good relationships also with your families, and having that ability to have information shared with you is certainly helpful and beneficial. The more you know your kids, the better you know your kids, the more that's obviously helpful. But there's obviously a world outside of Upper St. Clair, and threats and things happen everywhere. And as you said, nowhere's immune to it. We commit as much as we can to safety and security, and that's not going to lessen anytime soon. It's very unfortunate. I can remember when I first started teaching, and it wasn't that long ago. You're talking about 24 years ago, where the doors of the school would be wide open on a spring day, and it was letting the breeze come in, and nobody thought really much about it. You won't see that ever again. You won't see that kind of environment in a school, unfortunately, because you can't be. And so, but a very intentional and strong commitment to safety and security, and we have great support from our community with respect to that initiative.
Dr. Pfender, let's talk now. Let's say we have a family. They're just starting to enroll their kids into Upper St. Clair. They're watching this. What would you tell them? What would you tell them about the programs that you have and how you can serve their kids?
Sure. And actually, before I answer that, I wanted to go back to the middle school question real fast about social media. One thing that is really unique to our middle school programming is having teaching counselors. And so each student has a guidance class that they go through. And one of the components of the curriculum in those classes is to give social media overview and cyber safety. And so that's really unique to our middle school programming, and another support to consider. And so I totally forgot to mention that.
Well, I'm glad you did, because before we go into this question I just asked you, I want to bring a term that Tina, your communications director, brought to me, which I think is a terrific term. And it's something I think is relevant in your school today, and I want you to talk about it: digital citizenship. I mean, I had never heard that, but it just rang all kinds of bells to me as soon as I did. So talk about digital citizenship within the Upper St. Clair schools.
So once again, it's based off of the developmental readiness of students. There is a program or a resource that we utilize called Common Sense Media that gives us strategies to teach digital citizenship to some of our students, but it's really about that etiquette. How should I use my technology? What is the appropriate use of technology? When I see something that I shouldn't be seeing on technology, what do I do with that? And we, at our high school level, for our ninth graders, when they come in, there's a digital citizenship component that's part of their introduction to ninth grade that the teachers have designed based off of what they have seen out of students, but learning that approach of the best way to use my technology, because a school device is meant to be used for school. So that digital citizenship is unique to all of us, because we now teach kids that are digital natives, and we were all digital immigrants in terms of that vocabulary. So, and I think the digital citizenship also varies from student to student, because some students have more technology skills than others. From a family perspective, some have more leeway in their homes how they utilize their technology. So the digital citizenship is tied to that etiquette in terms of what you need to be utilizing your technology for and utilizing it appropriately in a safe way.
Dr. Rozzo, speak to that.
Yeah, it's hard to follow that. I mean, she captured it very well. I think that we having that teaching counseling model is very unique. You don't see that in many districts, and it allows us to really tailor programming that's constantly evolving. Things change in such a challenges that we dealt with and talked about last year may look very differently, in fact do look very differently today. So I think constantly educating our kids, but also trying to educate our parents too, and partnering with people. Right now we have the FBI coming in and they've presented to Fort Couch Middle School. Next week they'll be at Boyce Middle School, then we have them at the high school, and then we'll have a parent night, and it's all about this digital access. And it's not even just about the access the kids have, it's who has access to them, which is even more concerning, because that's the reality of what exists out there in that digital world. So I think continuing to put efforts into that is going to be a reality for us. It's really hard for parents, I say this too, to monitor and supervise all that, because it's ever changing. We did not grow up with that type of environment, and even if we did, it changes so quickly. I've joked about this before, and one time even as staff when we were talking about this, saying, when we were kids, if your parents wanted to stay on top of things or spy on you, I remember my parents they'd pick up the phone and listen in on my phone calls, which was so easy to do back then. Think about that, fast forward now to kids today, when your kids have their own phones and they have access to all these different platforms. It's a very difficult job for parents. So we try to offer programming in the district, whether it's through our parent-teacher council, bringing in partners like the FBI. We try to do things at least on an annual basis where we're educating parents to the best of our ability, because they're such an important partner, because the majority of their kids' time is outside of school, and those unstructured times are when they are more likely to be accessing things that may not necessarily be best for them.
Walking around with these devices that have everything you would want to find right in your pocket. It's amazing. Digital natives, digital immigrants, digital citizenship. We weren't talking about this a couple decades ago, but it's just a new reality. It's a new reality. So are you saying that the phones are put away in the classroom? Is that how Upper St. Clair operates?
That's the goal. At the high school, it looks a little bit different, but a lot of the underclassmen rooms, you'll see these phone caddies, and teachers will request that students kind of put their phones off to the side. I know a couple school years ago, there were some stories about how different districts were handling the personal devices throughout the school day, but we just look at it as another avenue of classroom management and how we have to manage student engagement. because at any point in time a student can go out to their locker as well too and send a text to a parent. I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of changed, is the instant access that parents and students have to each other, and how we balance that throughout a school day as well. And I'm certainly guilty of that with my 2 children, sending them text messages while they should be learning.
So yeah, so you get it. You
Yep,
get
I
it.
totally get it.
You get it. I just want to talk about, before we'll go back to that other question, but just teachers. I mean, teachers, I think, do some of the most important work in our country, and always have. When I looked at this pandemic, I thought about teachers and nurses, because they're on the front lines. They're on the front lines of teaching these kids and caring for these patients. I think those 2 professions were just strained beyond belief within the pandemic. And I think for some people it gave an appreciation for this profession. So you're both teachers, and you both know what it's like to be in the classroom. And now you oversee these teachers. So how do you balance support for them, but also holding them accountable to do the job that your parents are expecting them to do?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you really have to have both. You have to support your staff, but you also have to have very clear expectations that are best for students. We're fortunate that we have really good people, and that we have people that are kid focused, and that's part of what our culture is throughout the district. It's part of what every one of our building leaders, which are principals and assistant principals, making sure that's happening every day, is that every decision that's happening is, whether it's an instructional decision, whether it's a logistical decision in a building, that we're doing what's best for kids. And if that's not the case, that's when we do have to be honest with people and address it, because kids are our priority. And we tell people, our staff, you have the most important job in the world. We believe that. You are taking care of people, are trusting you with their children. And that is why parents are so passionate about things that happen in the school district, because we're talking about their children, and they should be. And so don't minimize your job, recognize the importance of it. And as I said earlier, we support people by doing all the programming, professional development, the mentoring, the collaboration with colleagues, and there's so many different mechanisms in place for that collaboration to exist, because you also don't want people to feel like they're on an island, because the challenges maybe I'm having in my classroom might look vastly different than the challenges you have. So having that professional network is certainly key to providing that support as well. But we're very clear, and there's no secret about it, that our expectations are that you have to always be doing what's best for kids. We're here to help, we're here to support, but the reason we're all here is because of our students. And if we don't have students, you don't need any of us. And so it's helpful for all of us to have that as a reminder every once in a while.
One of the things that I've noticed when I've moved into leadership positions is that I've had to engage in a lot of difficult conversations. Difficult. With people that are out there trying to do what they can do, but sometimes things go sideways. So Dr. Pfender, talk about that. Talk about difficult conversations that you've had to have in this district, in this role, and throughout your career, and how you handle those.
I don't think anybody enjoys a difficult conversation on either side of the fence. And once again, I know I keep talking a lot about the individual nature, but these difficult conversations, you also approach them differently depending on the person, depending on the scenario. I'm grateful that I don't feel like I have to have a lot of them. I also think that that's a skill set that grows over time for a leader. The way I approach a conversation now, I think, is very different than I would have in my first year as a building principal. And we are fortunate. We don't have to have a lot of them. I think what we have are more critical conversations in terms of not becoming complacent, making sure that when we set an expectation and change needs to happen, that there's the set guidelines, expectations in terms of which to have those. I think if you have a critical conversation in many ways, then you're avoiding some of the difficult conversations. Difficult conversations are a piece of the job. But I think that we just are constantly talking with people that sometimes when you have to step into a difficult conversation, it might not even feel like a difficult conversation depending on how much you've been talking with somebody. So in terms of like specifics, I think those are all just really unique to each person and each experience, but we are constantly talking with people. And it might not always be teachers and it might not always be students, but we are constantly engaged and try to really know who our people are. And if a difficult conversation is needed, maybe it's not always us that's the best person to have that conversation. We look to see who makes the most sense to step into that conversation, because a message from either of us may be received or perceived very differently than one of our building principals or another supervisor. So that's all of the stuff that kind of goes into a decision making around a difficult conversation.
You know, Dr. Rozzo, I think some people, they want to bypass some of your staff and they just want to go straight to the top. That's happened to me in some cases. And some of those are difficult conversations, right? So how about you with difficult conversations? I think it's interesting, Dr. Pfender, talking about evolving there, because I have too. It's like using a muscle. You do it more, you get more familiar with it, and you're able to be more comfortable with it. Where do you stand with having to deliver difficult conversations to parents, to principals, to teachers, to students? Where are you with that?
Well, it's inherent in the work you do. We have 4,000 students, over 500 employees. Difficult conversations are going to happen when you deal with those type of numbers. It's just reality. And so I approach, difficult conversations the way, first of all, I approach them with treating people respect. I always respect their position. I want to hear their point of view. I want to hear their thoughts, their rationale. I articulate my position. It's okay. Sometimes it's healthy to disagree. We can agree to disagree. At the end of it, though, what I always try to tell people, particularly when it's in a professional setting, is I'm here to do what's best for the students. And you may not agree with that. You may have a different opinion about how we get there, and that's okay. But I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be direct. I'm going to be respectful, and I'm always going to put our kids first. And so it's all in how you handle and how you treat people. Yes, sometimes are there conversations that are incredibly difficult. Absolutely. When you have to deliver difficult news or bad news to someone, something they don't want to hear, it's not always well received. But I think people generally appreciate honesty. They appreciate when you treat them respectfully, and when you show them that you care too. I've had a lot of tough conversations where at the end of the conversation, you wouldn't have thought it was a tough conversation, because you have to be, your very best leaders have to have a high sense of empathy for others. And if you don't have that, there will be limitations on your leadership. Some people could say, if you're empathetic, maybe that's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, is what it is, because you're confident enough and you care enough. You're confident enough in yourself and care enough about others, and that's how you get the most out of people and the most out of situations. People need to know you care, and you care about the right stuff.
I think it's just so remarkable what you say there. I talked about my father, and one of the three things he really burned into me was to be honest, to be respectful, and to treat people the way you want treated. And so that's what I've found with the difficult conversations I've had to have. You can be direct, but you can be respectful. They're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
And I think that's what you speak to.
Absolutely.
And that's, we've been on the other end of those. We deliver those, we've been on the other end of those, and you just want to treat them the way you would want to be treated in that situation. So I appreciate you bringing up respect. And it's not always the case, but it's really the way to do it. I appreciate how you say that. The school board, what is your relationship with the school board, and how does that mesh to achieving your goals?
Well, my relationship with the school board is a superintendent, what a lot of people don't realize is considered a school board member technically. Okay. So you're the 10th member of a 9-member school board, you're just not a voting member. But the success of a school district, a lot of it is directly linked to the governance and leadership by a school board and the relationship the school board has with the administration. And so for us here, again, I've been part of the district for a long time. That has really been one of the assets and I think key drivers in success of this district, and the continued culture that we have here is we've had really strong people on our school board in terms of their commitment to our schools, our kids, and doing the right thing for our district. I often say to people that we have a great school board here. We really do. They care about the right stuff. They care about kids. They understand their role. They support us. They hold us accountable. But they're very kid-centered. They're very people-centered. And we're very, very fortunate with that. If I, as the superintendent, don't have a strong working relationship and collaborate at a high level with the board, what happens is that dysfunction would permeate throughout the district. Regardless of how good your students are, how good your staff is, people would feel that. And so having that chemistry and that relationship between the board and the administration is so paramount in creating a great school district. And I feel very fortunate here that has been something we have had for many years.
Dr. Pfender, let's talk about parents. I think the boomer generation maybe started with the helicopter parenting, lawnmower parenting. There's a lot of different terms for this, where parents are becoming so overly involved in their kids' education. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who just celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary. And I was asking her, I said, about how did you do it? What was it like raising your kids? And one of the things she said to me really struck me. That said, you know what we used to do, Lee? I said, what? She goes, if our kids failed, we would let them fail. And we would let them pick themselves up. Certainly we were there to support them, but we felt that it was important for them to see what that's like, because that's what's going to happen in their life. But I think that we have parents, and I know this because I deal with youth sports, and sometimes I talk to parents, they don't want to see that. They want to protect, and it's out of love. It's out of love for their kids. We understand that. But some parents, when it comes to sports, and they're not getting playing time or whatever it else is in the schools, talk to me about how Upper St. Clair works with overly involved parents.
I think the bottom line is any parent's just doing what they think is right and best for their child, right? So I think we look at it from that perspective, that at the end of the day, a parent loves their child deeply. They want what's best for them. And it's just about keeping those lines of communication open. I think parents are always doing what they think is best for their child. And we as a school also do things in terms of what we know instructionally is best for a student, or programmatically what is best for a student. And we have meetings and we work with families, and sometimes there's a shift in a philosophy of a parent, there's a shift in the philosophy of the school around a mindset for a student. So I don't necessarily want to paint the picture that we have parents that are over the top all of the time, and or that we frown upon that, because we know at the end of the day, because we are Upper St. Clair, we also have parents who care deeply about their education of their child. And to set a stage or an example that the way they feel about something is the wrong way, you're going to create a barrier. And that's not what we want to have happen. So it's about, like I keep saying, the communication, the relationships. Sometimes we might have to just kind of sit back a little bit and let things happen and observe and monitor those for a student while a parent is overly involved. But at the same time, I don't know if I would expect our parents to not be overly involved. So, and as a parent, I think we've all done it. I said, you know, by the time I had a 1-month-old, I broke 5 rules that I said I would never do. So, in terms of our parents, they are just doing what they think is best every day. And being a teenager, being a child is hard, but being a parent is really hard work too.
Yeah, especially with the digital citizenship and the digital natives and immigrants. It's just made parenting, and then you throw the pandemic on top of that, it's really tough to be a parent. You know, Dr. Rozzo, because sports has played a big part in my life, you know, I know a lot of high school coaches, and we've had some of your coaches in here. Danny Holzer probably the most, who is now your athletic director, I understand. Parents get very involved in their kids when it comes to sports and their playing time, so to speak. So how does Upper St. Clair manage that?
Well, I think, you know, it's the same philosophy as when we hire teachers in the classrooms. You have to hire the right people to coach your programs. You have to hire people that are kids first, people who are going to be honest, and we have a full onboarding with all of our coaches, and they have annual meetings with the athletic director. They have evaluations by the athletic director where they receive feedback. They will have the support they need, but it does come down to, if you build meaningful relationships with kids, families, and you clearly communicate. If there's one thing I think that probably parents and a lot of families struggles with, is if you're not communicating with them. And so if you're doing all those things, and you're still in a situation where somebody is being unreasonable, then by all means, you know, we will certainly meet with families and we will address individual circumstances. But if you hire well and you have good people, it certainly helps navigate some of that tough stuff. You know, I often say being a parent's the toughest job there is. It really is. And, you know, kind of to Dr. Pfender's point she made about, when it comes to sports, parents are, if they are being deemed as, you know, complaining or upset with something, it's out of care for their kid, and it's out of them thinking that they're doing what's best for their kids. Sometimes they're right, and sometimes maybe they're not, and it's about having conversations and having that open door. And again, it's we have a great athletic director and I think a great group of coaches right now. There's always room for improvement in everything you do, but I think when you have people who are respected by kids too, that's a big part of it. I'm a parent of a high school athlete, and my son, I know the relationship. He plays football, and so his relationship with his coaches, it's not because it's my son, it's because it's such a strong one, and he respects them so much that as a parent, it gives you a sense of comfort knowing that, okay, my kid feels respected, valued, and really a part of this program. It does change your whole view of things as a parent when you know that your kid feels good and happy about something.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the best ways I heard a coach frame the parent-player relationship in their coaching was, he stood up in front of a group of parents and he said, let's just look at this like a megaphone that a cheerleader might use. There's a small opening on this end and a big opening on the other end. You parents, when you are given that megaphone, you're looking in that big part and you're looking right at your child. But me, as the coach, I'm looking in the small part and I'm looking at all of your children. And so I thought that was brilliant just a great way to frame what a coach is trying to do with his team and build a team. So I have never forgot it, and I think it's a terrific thing for coaches to say. We're almost done here, and I just want to give you both an opportunity to, a new parent's coming into Upper St. Clair, and we'll start with you, Dr. Pfender. What do you want to communicate to that parent of what they can expect in your school district?
It's a tough question because I think the expectations start with what parents want to get out of the education system as well too. So I would say if you are choosing to live here in the Upper St. Clair School District, you are also choosing to get the best educational experience, starting with your kindergarten. Kindergarten registration actually starts next week, and that's one of our best times in the school year, is getting to see our new families coming in and getting to meet them. But you are signing up for the best, and you will get the best, and we will work really hard because people are committed. And you will have opportunities here that you may not have in other districts. And if you are choosing to be here with us, we are also going to be very committed to making that experience what you want it to be.
Dr. Rozzo, why don't you talk to them? It's the same thing.
Yeah, I can speak not only as somebody who's been a long-standing employee, but also as a parent of children, one who is a recent graduate from the district. So I also have that experience and perspective as well, and say that I believe there's no place like Upper St. Clair. Maybe I'm biased, but I think I'm accurate. It's a great place to raise children, great community. You're going to have the best, most talented teachers, a school district that's committed to resources that are essential to meeting kids' needs, a lot of opportunities, and they're not just academic opportunities. You have administration, a school board. You have an entire commitment to doing what's best for kids. And come and visit one of our schools. You'll feel it in the air. You'll feel it in the culture when people visit the schools. And I don't say that to boast, I just say it with pride, that walk into our school buildings, whether it's a high school, elementary school, you'll feel the culture. It's a great culture. It's second to none. And I can assure you that we're committed to keep getting better and better because that's what our kids deserve.
So it sounds so great. I want to thank you both for coming. We spent a couple hours here today, and we just flew by with a whole lot of subjects, but I can't thank you both enough. I really have decided that I want to do more interviews with education. So I thought, let's just start at the top at Upper St. Clair, and I'm so glad that you both would come and spend some time with me. I think it's so important. Our schools are so important. This school is so important. What you do for these families is everything to those families, because that's their kids. That's their kids. And so I just can't thank you both enough. You're two terrific administrators of a school system that's ranked #1, and I can see why after spending these couple hours with you. So I want to thank you for coming, and I want to wish you both continued success with those high expectations that St. Clair has.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for watching. And I'm going to leave you with this. I volunteer for the Center for Organ Recovery and Education. These are people that do organ transplants and organ donation. If you, your mother, your father, your sister, your brother needed an organ to save their life, would you take it? I think most of us know what our answer would be. So I just encourage you all to sign up to be organ donors. It's a way to give the gift of life, and a gift of life is a gift that keeps on giving. Thank you so much for watching today with these two terrific examples of Upper St. Clair school system. Please join us for another edition of One-on-One. I'm your host, Lee Adams. Take care of yourself.